So ever since the start of this project, I've had this idea in my head, which is essentially build a generator out of an exercise bike. And, let's just say it was a lot harder to make than I thought. But this is the story of how I created Electro. So like all successful projects, Electrobike started with a vision. We're going to turn it into a generator. Essentially, take the bike, put a belt around the wheel, and then connect the other end to that belt to something that spins and essentially generates electrical energy. Now, at the time, I didn't know what I would put there, but I knew it existed. And then hook that up to a battery, and then hook the battery up to whatever we needed to power. Now, that may sound like sort of simple at first, but it was not simple. There was a lot more that went into it, and this is that story. So after we solidified the idea and realized that this was a very possible thing that we could do, we set out to work. And the first thing we did was remove the wheel. Ooh, that's heavy. The wheel just came out, and boy, it was very heavy. So much so that we ended up putting cardboard down on the floor because we didn't want to dent it again. The reason we had to take the wheel out was so we could get the belt for the wheel in between the two prongs of the bike, which normally held the wheel, because there's no way to get it in there without taking off the wheel entirely. So we began fitting the belt around the wheel, and that belt came from an old car. So now that we had the belt put around the wheel, it was now time to start attaching the alternator, which was the heart of the machine. This was the part that converts the kinetic energy of spinning the bike to the potential energy that can be stored in a battery. But how does it convert the kinetic energy into potential energy? Now, an alternator is no simple machine, but it can be explained in a simple way. Now, in a car, the alternator would be used to charge the car battery through motion of the engine, but we're using motion from our bike to charge our battery. But now it's time to take a look inside the alternator. If we take a look at this diagram, it's very complicated. But now take a look at this one. It's a lot simpler, right? They show the same thing. Let's keep looking at the simpler one. In an alternator, there are magnets and coils, just like in this simple model. Now, the kinetic energy coming into the alternator is what moves these magnets around. But how do the magnets and the coils interact with each other? When these magnetic fields are moving, it pushes and pulls on the electrons that are in the copper or aluminum coils, and this creates an electrical current. This is because metals like copper and aluminum have electrons that are very loosely held. So now that you have the basics of how an alternator works, let's get back to the experiment. So now that we understand that the alternator is the heart of our device, we need to figure out a way to mount it to the front. And we did that using these. These are the things on a school bus that hold up the front mirrors. They're welded together. I didn't do this part. I don't know how to weld. But one thing I did do was adjust the size of the hole on the mounts in order to make it fit the exercise bike and the alternator. These are going to be our mounts for the alternator. So we're going to mount it to the bike and then also to the alternator. And we need to change the size of this hole so we can mount it to the alternator. You know how? Oh. By the way, this is done under supervision and with safety glasses. So after those were all properly cut, we began putting in the bolts to make a 3-point adjustment system, which is what we originally planned, where we would have 2 of the bars going up underneath from the bike to hold up the alternator, and 1 on the top to keep it stable. After I got the mounts attached for the alternator, we needed to put the cover back over the chain because we had originally taken that off so we could figure out what tools we needed to make it happen. And then it was time to test if the belt would stay on. Alright, yeah, it came off. So essentially the alternator was pulling the belt off of the wheel, so we needed to make some adjustments in order to have everything perfectly lined up so the belt wouldn't slip off. And after a few more minor adjustments, the belt was staying on perfectly. It's working! But now, we had to test if the alternator was doing its job. And in order to test if the alternator was creating that potential energy that we needed, we used a tool which essentially lights up if it is detecting that electrical energy. So after that was clipped in, it was time for the test. The test that would determine if Electrobike was a success. So we're looking for the light there. Let's do this. Why is it not lighting up? What happened? So after the alternator itself wouldn't light up the voltage tester, we plugged in a tool that actually told us the voltage, and essentially if it went up, that means everything was working, and if it didn't, we needed to find something to fix. Okay, so we tested it a couple times, and we've concluded that this alternator either doesn't work or needs a battery to work through like voltage tests and stuff like that. We're gonna call it a day. We determined that the alternator didn't work the way we intended it to, but hope was not lost because some alternators, because these are car parts, require an actual car battery for them to do their job. So the next day, that's exactly what we got. Welcome to day 2 of building. Today, we install a battery. Things were looking good at the start of day 2 because we had all the pieces that we needed. We had the bike, we had the alternator, we had the battery, and we had the inverter. We'll get into more about what all that stuff does later. So we had a stored battery voltage of about 12.7 that was already there in the battery. Before we tested the alternator again, we took off an extra brace that we didn't end up needing, which required essentially complete disassembly of the mount system that we had already. So now that we readjusted the brackets, it was time to connect the battery to the alternator, which required more disassembly and reassembly, and that was complicated, but I did it. Now it was time for the final voltage test. This would determine the fate of Electrobike. If that little number didn't move up, we were going to need to find another way to do this experiment. Alright, so we're going to pedal the bike and see, because that number needs to go up. Alright, here's the test. It's not going to go up. It's going down. In between. Yeah, that's just not gonna work. Battery part's working fine. The belt's working fine. It's the alternator. So this alternator very much does not work. Well, it was a disaster. The alternator wasn't working, so we need to find a way to either get a new one or give up on Electrobike, and I'd have to do something completely different for my science project. It looked like all hope was lost, but I wasn't ready to give up on Electrobike, so we did the responsible thing to do and bought a new alternator. So we ordered it, and then we waited, and after about a day or two of waiting, we got a new alternator. Now, I know I say new alternator, but alternators are usually not purchased new, at least at the price that we got it. So it was not completely new, but it had a better chance of working. So I unboxed the new alternator and then began meticulously disassembling the entire bracket system we had, because with this new alternator, we needed essentially to refit the entire bracket system. We were essentially starting from the beginning. So I re-put together all of the brackets, and we had the alternator on there. But then we were faced with a problem that we had seen before. The belt was coming off again. The belt keeps coming off because this needs to be like that. But we couldn't just bend the brackets. So what we ended up doing is we took this blue seatbelt looking thing and essentially made it pull on the alternator to move it from like this to that on the side and tied it around. And it ended up working. Everything seemed to be going good, but throughout that whole day, there was only one thought on everyone's mind. Would the new alternator work? But in order to attach the battery to this new alternator, we had a couple extra steps involved, such as creating a field wire to complete the circuit. So this is a field wire, and we need it because we didn't need it last time because that alternator there didn't have a regulator inside, but this one does. So essentially what this does is it tells the alternator what the output should be. So that's why we're making a little loop here. Plugging it in now. Now we have our field wire set. So we were hooking up the battery to the new alternator. But here was a fun part. We didn't have to take apart all the brackets this time because there was a special part on the alternator for just putting the battery on. So what's great about this alternator as opposed to the other one is that this one has a special spot for the negative wire, the other one. And that basically means that we don't have to take out these bolts below. So all our adjustments that we did last time can stay as they were. And so now, after attaching the battery, it was time for the test. The test of 3 days' work, if it all paid off. This is the grand test to see if all our work paid off. That's the current voltage of the battery. Now we spin it. It's going up. It's not going up. The second alternator was not working. But all hope was not lost because there was still one more idea we could do to make it work. In order to complete the circuit, we need a charging system indicator light, which basically, in your car, indicates if the system is charging. And so we're adding a light, and if the light's out, like the light is not on, it means that the alternator is functioning and turning our kinetic energy into potential stored energy. So that means we need another wire. So essentially with this light, it would like activate the alternator almost, and make it do its job. And this was our last resort. And then it was time for the final test. All right, terminal 1, that's where this is going. Now this part, this whole terminal bit wasn't even on our other alternator. This clip here is to the light, and it goes on the positive side, not the ground side. And now, that's proof of energy. It's good that the light's on, because that means that the alternator isn't doing anything right now. And it's not doing anything right now, because we're not on the bike. If this number goes up, then this science project is working. Ladies and gentlemen, electro bike. When that light turns off, that means this is likely working. Let's do it. Why is the light not turning off? There we go. Are we good? Are we going up? We're going up. Ladies and gentlemen, electro bike is a success. Look, see, light is on. And the meter is going. Electro bike was working. The numbers were going up. We successfully proved that you could harness human energy to charge a battery. So now with that newfound revelation and miracle, essentially, we plugged in the inverter. So this part is an inverter, and we need this to be able to plug things in. Basically what it does is it changes our 12 volts that we're making with this electro bike to household voltage, like your outlet on your wall. Like anything wire, red to red, black to black. Like that. black to black. Now we power it up. So now we were gonna charge a tablet, and essentially when we plugged it in the inverter, it would charge right away, but where Electrobike plays in is it would essentially keep the battery either stable or going up rather than going down when it charges. So we have my brother's old broken tablet. So this is going to charge right away because there was already charge on this battery. So it's going to charge in 3, 2, 1. It might take a little bit because it's completely dead. All right, so right now we are at 12.5 volts charging that tablet. Let's see if we can maintain that with only the power of Electrobike. It hasn't caught yet. Yeah, there we go. It's maintaining, right? We're maintaining voltage as it's actively charging, which means that is essentially being maintained by only human power. So while it may take a lot of human power to make something like this work, it has been proven that you can charge a tablet and a car battery with only human power. So now, after we had successfully proven that Electrobike is functioning and works, we had a little bit of fun plugging some stuff in. Okay, so the first extra thing that we're gonna plug into our Electrobike is this light. We'll set it up here. And it's gonna turn on when I turn the inverter on, but we're gonna see if we can maintain that power. Connect the light, right? Yep. Turn on the inverter. Plug in this light. Turns on. Now let's see, because it'll be draining the battery. Let's see if we can maintain it. Let's do it. We're doing it. Human power is powering the stage light. Electrobike was a success, and so I took a Sharpie and I decorated it. I drew all over the bike, just to show that it was successful. And that's Electrobike. And so, after 3 long days of hard work and random metal being spread around that room everywhere, we finally had a perfect representation of how human kinetic energy can be harnessed and turned into potential energy to charge a battery. Electrobike was officially a success. Thank you. Okay, what do I do with this now?